It's 1982, and the wrestling business is changing. There's a big battle royal in Hawaii on the horizon. We meet a couple of promoters with big personalities, and Lia Maivia breaks out her slapping gloves. We're talking Young Rock Season 1, Episode 3 on Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Chris.
And my name is Tessa.
And this is Pro Wrestling Repackaged, where the squared circle meets the small screen. This week we're discussing Season 1, Episode 3 of Young Rock, Forward Together. But before we dive in, let's just talk a little bit about how Young Rock is holding up in the ratings so far. So we have seen a little bit of a ratings dip from Episode 1 to Episode 2. It went from 5.32 million to 3.61 million, which is a 1.0 rating to a 0.8 rating. I don't know if that's necessarily indicative of a quality drop. In fact, I think the episodes have gotten better as they've gone along, but maybe people checking out the pilot and then maybe they'll watch the rest of the episodes later on when they can binge it. Or maybe some people just, it didn't hold them. What do you think about this ratings trend from Episode 1 to Episode 2?
I don't think that's particularly surprising. I think probably there was a lot of interest in the first episode, which is to be expected. And, maybe it was a lot of people who don't really know The Rock as The Rock. Maybe they decided they weren't really into the wrestling aspect of things.
That's a good point. Do you think that the fact that this is such a wrestling-heavy show, it's not about wrestling, but wrestling is a central part of this family story and The Rock's story, do you think that that's a deterrent for some people who maybe aren't familiar with wrestling at all?
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of people who weren't super familiar with The Rock as the wrestler that we know him as. So they probably are a lot less interested in these wrestlers, especially these old school wrestlers, these wrestling storylines. So they might just think, this show isn't for me. And I feel like it's going to be easy for viewers to just kind of drop in and out depending on what each episode is going to focus on. So maybe people who are less interested in the wrestling stuff, they won't want to watch the 1982 episodes. Maybe they'll care more about Dwayne starting on the football team in college. Maybe those are the episodes. So I wonder if there'll be a trend in which specific time periods get the most views.
I bet that that's something that they'll be looking at as well and kind of determining what gets more focus if this does get picked up for another season. And, I couldn't imagine this not getting picked up for another season, just being that it's doing so well for NBC. I could definitely see them getting another season order, but maybe tweaking the formula a little bit. Every time I think that I know what this show's formula is going to be, it kind of throws me for a loop, this episode included, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. But, the first episode we started out, we got a taste of everything. And we will see these things play out over the rest of the season. So if there was something there in the pilot that really grabbed you, you'll probably get enough of it by the time this season wraps up.
Right. And you always know going into Tuesday night what time period's going to be the focus.
Right. Yeah. I was personally really looking forward to seeing more of 82, which obviously we got in this episode, Episode 3. So I was very, very happy with this episode. I think it might be my favorite yet. But before we start to talk about the episode as a whole, we did also want to briefly mention that we watched a recent interview that Chavo Guerrero did with Wrestling Inc. And there were some interesting little notes about Young Rock and some other wrestling-related TV shows that he mentioned in this interview. The thing that stood out to me the most is that there were no stunt doubles used on Young Rock. No stunt people at all used for the wrestling sequences, which when you're working with such restrictions and, this was shot after COVID lockdowns and everything like that. So Chavo getting an entire stunt team to Australia for these wrestling sequences wasn't something that was very doable. So the wrestling sequences that we're seeing, the actors portraying these wrestlers, they're the ones in there doing the choreography, which makes it even more impressive to me how well the wrestling sequences come off.
Right, yeah. And Chavo mentioned that when he was working for Glow, they had, at least a month of preparation with the women for those wrestling scenes. And here they had very little time.
Yeah.
Not anywhere near as much time. But it still done incredibly well, I think.
I was really impressed with that. And I was really kind of taken aback by, oh, wow, these actors not only have to kind of get down the character beats of these kind of larger than life performers that they're portraying, but they also have to get the physicality down, which is not easy.
Especially not in such a short amount of time because they're on such a time crunch.
And with that, it is now time for this week's edition of The Rock Says.
The Rock says, The Rock says.
What's The Rock saying?
So we started this podcast sight unseen, so to speak, with Young Rock, and we didn't really know what the format would be. We kind of had a taste of it, from some interviews and from some previews, and we knew that The Rock would be, kind of giving this narrative of his life that would weave in and out of scenes from his past, and we know The Rock is a very quotable guy, so we decided to do this segment called The Rock Says. And the first episode, it worked out great, but we've been finding that sometimes The Rock doesn't even have the best lines on this show. So I would like to hereby let it be known that The Rock Says may not always be a quote from The Rock. This particular episode, I think we both do have a quote from The Rock, but I find that a lot of times Rocky Johnson has a great quote, or Atta, or in this episode, Lia had some great ones.
Even some
Iron
of the,
Sheik.
Yeah, I was just going to say some of the wrestlers have some great lines.
So going forward, I think maybe we can kind of expand the horizons of The Rock Says segment. But for now, why don't you kick us off with this week's?
Okay, my quote comes from 10-year-old Dewey. This is when he and Rocky walk into the gym. He says to the gym owner, "My dad is going to need all fan photos taken on his right side. That's his good side. Oh, and he's going to need 5 silver pens and 10 ripe mangoes, pre-sliced for energy."
That's a lot of mangoes.
So here we have young Dewey. He's really taking his role as the president of the Rocky Johnson fan club very seriously.
Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't ask for brown M&Ms. So my quote comes from the very end of the episode. And this is 2032 Presidential Rock's quote. And he says, "My dad knew his business was changing, and he was afraid of getting left behind. And that's a fear I know many Americans struggle with today. That's why, as your president, I will make sure none of us get left behind, and that change benefits all, not just some. Because when I see you, I see my grandmother. I see my mother and father. I see that we're all part of one family called America. I'm Dwayne Johnson, and I approve this message." And while this is being said, The Rock is walking through a factory, complete with a hard hat on his head, where we see humans and stormtroopers working together side by side on an assembly line. Quite the visual.
It's also just the most stereotypical politician commercial.
Yes, and the reason why this is so funny to me, it's because The Rock managed to basically turn this entire episode that we just watched into a campaign commercial.
That's what I was thinking at the end. Is every single episode just a commercial?
I think we are finding out slowly that this entire show is a commercial for the real-life presidential run that at this point I'm kind of convinced is going to happen.
He can't do this.
But he can.
He can.
He kind of can, and that's what scares me a little bit.
I think we need to put it out there. Would you vote for Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson if he ran for president? Not necessarily you, because I think I know the answer to that, but the general you.
The general you the listener. Let us know. Tweet us at PWRepackaged on Twitter. Email us, pwrepackaged@gmail.com. Let us know. Let us know your thoughts. Do you think The Rock is actually going to run for president? Would you vote for him? Let us know. Tweet us or email us. And with that, let's get into the episode. Young Rock Season 1, Episode 3, Forward Together, directed by Jeffrey Walker and written by Jen D'Angelo. The first thing I want to mention in this episode is my complete disappointment in the lack of Randall. Now, we got a little bit of him setting us up at the beginning, but this wasn't a sit-down interview with The Rock and Randall connection. This was more of a strategy meeting with The Rock and his campaign manager, who I don't believe is named.
Yeah, I don't think they gave her a name, but I was really disappointed that there wasn't a lot of Randall either. I think he's one of the best parts of the show.
We mentioned last week that, we don't sing the praises of Randall enough, and sure enough, the next episode we don't have the opportunity to, but I've really enjoyed that character and his chemistry with The Rock and his ability to be just as funny, if not more funny, than The Rock in those scenes that they share together. So
Oh, he's hilarious.
So definitely missed Randall this week. So hopefully we see him again next week. But we're in a strategy meeting with The Rock and his campaign manager, and the discussion is big concerns among voters, and the biggest one being job security, which is how we set up this entire episode. The Rock tying his own insecurities in the past about his future and the challenges that he and his family were facing, and kind of setting that up as the narrative of the episode relating to his campaign strategy, which we find out at the end this was all just a big commercial.
It's campaign propaganda.
I also wanted to mention, at this point, we're 3 episodes in, we have yet to meet Rosario Dawson's character. So that's something that I kind of thought of while we were watching this episode. I thought maybe we would see her in this scene at the very beginning, but we haven't yet. So I'm also anxious not only to get Randall back, but to get Rosario Dawson's character kind of in the mix here.
Because she's part of the campaign, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes, I believe that's what I read in that Entertainment Weekly article. But we flash back to 1982 in Hawaii, and The Rock is setting up that things are really drastically changing when Rocky Johnson first started working for the WWF. And the first way that we see that is that, the novelty of wrestling being broadcast nationally. Ata compares it to being watched nationwide like the Jeffersons, I think she says. And we see them watching TV in a hotel room, and we see Rocky Johnson versus the Black Demon, which is a match that actually did happen twice on WWF TV in December of 1982. Rocky did win both. The Black Demon, of course, was Jose Luis Rivera, also one of the conquistadors. And the other thing that we see at this point is Vince McMahon, our introduction to Young Rock's version of Vince McMahon on commentary. What did you think of Vince McMahon being portrayed by Adam Ray?
Well, first, I loved what Ata said about him, that the camera loves a strong chin dimple.
Does it?
I'm glad they got that in there.
I just think of that Cranky Vince Twitter account where the picture is just his chin, just zoomed right in on his chin. It just gives me the creeps. But I really liked this scene of them just all sitting around the TV watching one of Rocky Johnson's matches, and young Dewey's kind of just, his mind is blown. That's like, you're on TV wrestling the Black Demon, but you're also here.
I had the same experience once. I had gone to a wrestling show, my very first wrestling show in Pittsburgh, and Stone Cold was there. And then when I got home, wrestling was on TV, and Stone Cold was on TV, but it wasn't Pittsburgh. It was not the show that I had just been at.
So you went to a house show?
Yeah. And I was so freaked out by the
Are there 2 Stone Colds?
It was so weird. I was like, I just saw him. He was just there.
That's funny. So Rocky Johnson, being that he is now a big star, a big nationwide star on WWF television, he's kind of doubling down on his merch stand. So he has a suitcase full of merch, hats, t-shirts, etc. And the quote here that I took away from this is that he says, "I'm on track to being Vince's #1 guy." And over the course of this episode, we kind of see the slow realization in Rocky that that is not the case. But I really feel so bad for Rocky Johnson based on how we've seen him in the 2 prior episodes. We know that that's not the case, and we know from real life that that is not the case, but the enthusiasm and kind of the spark and the excitement of Rocky Johnson in this episode and his energy, it's so infectious, but the sad truth is that that would not be the case. He would not be Vince's #1 guy, as we know.
Yeah, we know what's happening, so it's just this kind of depressing view. He's so excited. He thinks that this is going to be his big thing, and that the people love him, and they clearly do because he's in Hawaii. They do anyway.
Yeah, we see the popularity of not only WWF, but Polynesian pro wrestling really exploding. We see later in a scene where Rocky Johnson walks into a restaurant and everyone starts cheering. So him becoming more of a recognized figure and kind of universally loved, and the popularity, so the highs of the wrestling business, but then kind of the reality setting in that, hey, maybe I am not going to be Vince's top guy. Maybe I need to make, a different decision about what my career is and where I am right now. So a very interesting angle to kind of set up for Rocky Johnson in this episode. Another angle being set up in this episode was for Ata. as we see her singing a song about room service to the tune of That's Amore. So really setting up the fact that she can sing, first of all, something that we know from watching her and The Rock on, I believe it was Fallon. She was singing and playing ukulele, but setting up in the show that she sings and that she's good at it. So Atta getting her own kind of storyline that doesn't involve Diane.
Doesn't involve Dwayne, doesn't involve Rocky, doesn't involve any of them. She just kind of gets her own thing.
We go over now to the Strudel Hut Diner. Now, The Rock would talk a lot about strudel in his promos. Do you think that The Rock's affinity for strudel came from the Strudel Hut Diner?
I mean, you have to imagine it did. Is this a real place?
If this indeed did exist. Now,
I'd like to know if it's real.
You know, in my research for this episode, I did not look up if the Strudel Hut Diner is a real place. Maybe it's just a figment of The Rock's imagination. I wouldn't put it past him, but Lia Maivia is the star of this episode, I feel, and it's not hard to realize why. She has a very commanding presence. We set up the fact that her death stare, she can make anyone do anything, you know, just the sheer power that this woman commands over not only wrestlers, but waitresses, as she commands a pen out of this waitress's pocket, even though it's her only one. Lia Maivia really set up to be kind of the force behind the Maivia Johnson family and, of course, pro wrestling in Hawaii.
Yeah, she's the top promoter. It's the top organization there, which we see creates some problems in this episode. But you can tell that she really ruled with an iron fist.
I love this adorable moment of young Dewey, played by Adrian Gru. We know how to pronounce his name now, thanks to watching interviews with him, giving his dad this ring announcer entrance at the restaurant and everyone cheering. And as we mentioned before, WWF gets more popular nationwide. So Lia's promotion is also seeing the benefits of that. You know, a rising tide raises all ships. And we find out that Lia is the only promoter that Vince McMahon allows his wrestlers to work for outside of the WWF. So the working relationship between Vince and Lia, very strong at this point.
And she says that there's a specific reason for that.
Yes.
Her pulled pork recipe.
Yes. The Kahlua pork that we hear mentioned later by Vince. He really enjoyed that pork.
Yeah, I want to know if that really happened.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
And who makes it? Does he make it? Is Vince in the kitchen?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Does he still make it?
Well, the only thing I know that Vince McMahon likes to eat is steak wraps with ketchup. So I'm not sure if he's still breaking out the Kahlua pork recipe, but maybe Young Rock will inspire him to go back to it. The other really notable thing from this scene here is the poster for the big Island Battle Royal, this 18-man Battle Royal that's happening. And we see these really cool shots of, we go to each wrestler's picture on the poster, and then it starts to move and they start to talk. And we see Rocky Johnson, the Iron Sheik again, who I was very happy to see again. Greg the Hammer Valentine, who I did not know we were getting a portrayal of. That was a nice little surprise. Junkyard Dog, Andre the Giant, Macho Man Randy Savage, and King Kong Bundy, another surprise. But not actually, because his mom is quote-unquote sick. And Lia, at this point, taking the wrestler by their word, as she will come to realize is a mistake in this episode. You know, she says, well, nothing's more important than family, and she understands. So Bundy's off the show. Bundy's out of the Battle Royal. I really enjoyed this. I love these retro-looking presentations of these awesome portrayals of these wrestlers. I really can't say enough about the casting of this show. I think that they've done such a great job of trying to find actors who can not only portray these wrestlers from a visual standpoint, but also their personalities.
Right, yeah. I think we're going to say it probably every single episode, just how well done the casting is. They're so good. I really love the Iron Sheik.
Yeah. He's. I think he gets the most out of kind of this cast of wrestlers here, obviously aside from the main characters, but we did get a lot more of Junkyard Dog in this episode, played by Nate Jackson, and also Randy Savage, played by Kevin McAlee.
Is this the first time we've met Savage? Because I know we've seen him in the previews, but he hasn't been in the episode.
Yeah, this is the first episode where we've seen Randy Savage, I believe. And it wasn't much, but it's enough to know he's there.
That's all you need.
Yes. Of course, I would love to see more of all of these. I think this is one of the really, really fun kind of things that pulled me into this show is this, these portrayals of these wrestlers. It's enough to get me in the door. And then what I stay for is the heartwarming moments and these kind of the family moments that happen with, the Maivia Johnson family. Another important thing to note with this scene is that we get a quick mention in passing of Peter Maivia and the fact that he has passed on, and Atta has to clean out some of his things and sort them and figure out what to keep or what to donate. That comes back later in the episode, but at this point, I believe this is one of the first real focused mentions of the fact that Peter Maivia has passed.
Yeah, I think in the first episode, they have his grandma do a little praising to him after they mention his name, but it's just kind of in passing. Here, he becomes kind of more of a focal point.
Yeah, this episode really introduced Peter as an important figure in this story, and we even got an actor portraying him who I thought did a good job, and we would see a little bit later while Atta's watching home movies. But another man that we meet in this episode is Bob, Lia's assistant Bob, who sits outside the restaurant reading the newspaper, and he didn't come in because it's a family breakfast. Bob not invited to family breakfast.
This poor guy. I feel like every single episode there's going to be one character that just like weirdly stands out. We had Waffle in the one episode, and this episode we have Bob, and they kind of just sort of steal the show in their little parts.
You know what I would love to see by the end of, I don't know, of the season or by the end of the show, Bob finally be invited in to family breakfast. That's the kind of growth that I love to see over the course of a show. That's what I'm here for.
He becomes part of the family.
We move over to a scene where Rocky and Dewey go to the gym together, and there's this shot where there are these pictures on the wall of maybe different people who have worked out there and whatnot. And Rocky Johnson is, of course, on the wall. And there's also a picture of Sylvester Stallone, who Rocky says is Rocky number 2, which is funny because they're both kind of named after Rocky Marciano, the boxer. So technically, they're Rocky number 2 and 3. So which one is 2 and which one is 3, we'll let you decide at home. But we also here get Andre the Giant showing off his new action figure to the group of wrestlers, and Rocky is so jealous.
Yeah, he thought that he was Vince's top guy. So the fact that Andre is getting a personalized action figure sent specifically from Vince, it hurts a little.
Yeah, because there's a line, are we all going to get one? Something to that effect. Yeah. And Andre's just like, nope, only me. And what do you know? The arms move as well. I always hated those action figures where the arms moved or you pressed a button in the back and it kicked.
What are you supposed to do with those?
I don't know. I always found that to just be too complicated. I had a Bret Hart that had a lever in the back, so its arms would move up and up and down, almost like he's doing a crotch chop or something. And I just always found it annoying because there's this thing sticking out of his back. The same I had in Austin where you press in the back and the leg kicked.
Yeah, we had that too.
That was my first Austin action figure, and I was very excited for it. But I hated that stupid thing in the back. But back in 1982, I'm sure this was like the most impressive thing anyone had ever seen.
Now, what I was wondering, is this an authentic one? Was this one from 1982 that he's holding?
Oh, the actual
here?
one that we see in the show?
Or is this just, did they make this one
I don't
figure
know. I am not a big wrestling figure nerd. I know that is a really, really popular thing. People have these huge collections and, they buy all the new figures, they buy all the old figures. And I know that's a very popular thing. So if you are one of those people and you happen to know, was this an actual figure or is this one that they could just kind of mocked up for the show? Let us know. We'd love to know little details about things like that because back in 82, I can't imagine that wrestling figures were as common as they would become even 10 years later. But at the time, we see kind of the novelty among the wrestlers. Oh, there's an action figure of one of us. So this is probably something very new at the time. We move over to a scene of Atta, Afa, and Sika watching home movies on a projector. And we see Atta, a younger version of Atta, singing a song and playing ukulele. And her dad is there with her as well. So this was just a very nice little kind of throwback to Atta's younger days, and we get some footage of Peter, and we can see the actor portraying him. Just a very nice moment that we'll see a little bit more of later. But over in Lia's office, she's having a sit-down meeting with the Iron Sheik, and this was one of my favorite scenes in this episode, I think. I mean, it starts off with Francine, the dog, groaning, and the Iron Sheik goes, what is wrong with Dog? And Lia goes, nothing. She has a tumor. She's resting.
Ever since the first episode, I have been so stressed about this dog. It's always in some sort of pain, and Lia's just like, don't worry about it.
Has The Rock mentioned anything thus far in the book The Rock says about the dog? Have you seen anything so far?
There is no mention of the dog. I don't know if it exists.
Okay, very concerned about this dog.
I'm really worried.
Dog Watch 2021 here on Pro Wrestling Repackaged. So the reason for this meeting is that they're running through a list of things that the Iron Sheik can't say at this family barbecue that Lia is throwing before the big match. So they're obviously censored out, but curse words that he cannot say because the Iron Sheik, as we know, is a very prolific swear word user. So I thought that was pretty funny. He's just, I can't say beep. I can't say beep.
Well, he says he's a family guy. It's a family barbecue. He's a family guy. This shouldn't be any problem, but...
Yes, Uncle Iron Sheik with the foul mouth. He has to watch his mouth around young Dewey. But at this point, Bob comes in with the news that King Kong Bundy lied to Lia, and he backed out of the show not because his mom was sick, but because he's going to wrestle for Greg Yao. Greg Yao, the other star of this episode, I feel, who dresses like Marty McFly when he has to go back to 1885 to rescue Doc. What did you think of Ronnie Chiang as Greg Yao?
So in this scene, we don't really get to see him do anything, but the fact that Yao is putting himself on the posters for his shows, just as the booker, he's not a wrestler.
I love a promoter with a big personality, and Greg Yao definitely does not disappoint. Now, Lia mentions that Greg Yao used to work for Peter Maivia, but once Peter passed, he didn't want to work for a woman. So he started his own promotion. I don't think he really needed any extra incentive to start his own promotion, though. He seems like he's very much likes to be in the limelight and dress very loudly as he's a
cowboy.
A very colorful cowboy. But we're setting up here that Yao is maybe a threat to Lia's promotion, and he's signing her wrestlers to exclusive contracts in Hawaii. He signed King Kong Bundy. So this starts to set Lia on a warpath, and I feel like this is setting the groundwork for a longer running story throughout the rest of the season of this kind of war between Greg Yao and Lia Maivia.
Well, how would you feel if someone was poaching your talent and saying exclusive contract?
Yeah, I mean, that's just how it's done in the wrestling business, you know? You got to swoop in and steal the competition's big stars and lock them down in exclusive contracts. That's just how it's done.
I mean, it's still happening today.
But we move over to this barbecue scene on the beach, and the gang's all here, which I really, every time we get one of these scenes with all the wrestlers together, it just kind of makes my heart happy. It's just, this is the fun of this show, I think, is still the novelty has not worn off for me of all of this. And I don't know if it ever really will, because I just constantly have to zoom out and just think that this is a comedy on NBC in prime time. And we are seeing Randy Savage, Junkyard Dog, the Wild Samoans, all these portrayals of these legendary wrestlers just on NBC, you know, no big deal. You're flipping the channels, you see a Randy Savage on NBC. Like, what? I imagine that the discovery of this show for some people just flipping through the channels, not even really knowing about it, going into it, I imagine that it's pretty wild.
Yeah, imagine flipping through channels and seeing the Iron Sheik doing whatever it is that he's doing.
The running joke throughout this scene is that Bob just has too much corn on the grill. It is mentioned by several people, and this is where it really starts to build that kind of pathos for Bob. You know, starts to tug at the heartstrings. And this man, he's very proud of his corn. He's just trying to grill up some corn for everyone, and they're just giving him the business.
Now, I'm of the opinion that any corn is too much corn, so I can't really sympathize with him here.
Yeah, we're a divided corn couple. I am a fan of corn. I don't really eat it that much, but when I do, I enjoy it. And you don't like corn at all. Although you do like popcorn.
I like popcorn and I like corn pops. But
what about cornbread?
It's fine.
See, I'm a fan of all things corn. I like the band Korn a little bit, but corn, the food, I'm a fan of. Thumbs up. So I'm with Bob on this one. And I would gladly eat the corn that Bob is grilling.
Also, in this scene, we continue to see Andre the Giant showing off his little action figure, and it's arms. he's so proud.
He's very proud of that thing. He's such a big giant, but such a small action figure. Now, I want to check in with you about Andre because in our introduction episode, you mentioned that you maybe had some issues with the way that this portrayal of Andre the Giant looked, just maybe being a little bit too thin, was it that you said?
Yeah, he just doesn't look the way I thought Andre the Giant looks. But as we see more of him, I think I'm just getting used to him. So I think he's doing a good job.
I think right off the bat, I've been a fan of Matthew Willig's portrayal. I think he does a great job of kind of capturing Andre's cadence and the kind of presence that he commands. I think he's doing a great job. But another thing happening at this barbecue is one of the Wild Samoans trying to encourage Ata to sign up for Star Search. Now, before American Idol and things like that, there was a show called Star Search. The reason I know Star Search is because Joey Gladstone was on Star Search on an episode of Full House. He did a comedy routine. So that's always been, whenever I think of Star Search, I just think of that.
You know what I think's going to happen? I don't think she's going to make it there. Because she's just going to audition for it. I don't think she's even going to make it to an audition. I feel like something is probably going to happen that's going to be completely out of the picture. Like maybe there's going to be some family crisis.
But there is someone who is not at this barbecue, and conspicuous by his absence, as Vince McMahon would say, is Junkyard Dog, whose mother apparently is now, quote unquote, sick, just like King Kong Bundy's, and he can't make it to the barbecue.
So Lia immediately knows what this means. It's a lie. And Yao has once again poached one of her wrestlers.
Yeah, time to get out the slapping gloves. So that leads Lia and Rocky to confront JYD about what's going on. Is he working for Yao? And it turns out that Yao gave him a smoked ham with a note that says he wants to talk. He upgraded JYD to a nice hotel. And JYD is just under the impression that he's going to be a star in Yao's promotion. And he even says to Rocky, we're never going to be Vince's number one star. It's always going to be Andre. So he wants to be a star. He wants to move to greener pastures. So he's moving over to Yao's promotion.
But Yao also promises that he'll have complete control over his gimmick. He can become Penthouse Dog.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like what would have happened if he joined the $1 Million Corporation or something like that, Penthouse Dog.
So at this point, we also see Rocky starting to question his own decisions and thinking maybe he should move on to Yao too. He wants to be a big star and he doesn't think he's going to get it while working with Lia. So there's doubt seeping into his mind as well.
So all of this leads to another appearance by Vince McMahon. We saw him earlier doing commentary on Rocky Johnson versus the Black Demon, and now we see him giving Lia a phone call, and of course he thanks her for her Kahlua pork recipe, which he really enjoyed, and Vince is reassuring her that Yao isn't really a threat to Lia and things like that, and just kind of reassuring her. But he also has some bad news that his father booked Madison Square Garden for the same date as Lia's Big Battle Royal, so he has to pull some guys from her show because Billy Joel is eating up all the other nights, according to him. But he says he won't take Rocky Johnson or the Wild Samoans.
I can't help but wonder what the real Vince McMahon thinks of this portrayal. I checked his Twitter to see if for some reason he had posted anything about the show, but there was nothing. And as we know, wrestling fans have some very strong opinions about Vince McMahon as a person. So I'm really curious to see how and if he'll continue to be portrayed. Will he be a good guy? Because we know that NBC and WWE have a partnership. Or are we going to see some more evil Vince McMahon?
Well, at this point, we see that even though he has to pull a lot of his wrestlers from her show, there doesn't seem to be any animosity on either end. So I assume that will take a turn at some point, and we'll see the trajectory of Vince McMahon starting to kind of impose his will and take a little bit more advantage. And we even see in this conversation that Lia is, in tears as, just the difficulties of booking a wrestling show and being in charge of a promotion. And it's just a lot on her shoulders without having Peter by her side.
Right. And this is all still very new to her. I think at the beginning of the episode, they mentioned that it had only been 3 months since he passed. So she's only been in charge of things for the past couple months. And, she's watched Peter do it But it's really different when you have to actually get in there and deal with all of this.
Yeah, and that's something that we will see her and Atta have a conversation about a little bit later. But Francine the dog, in the meantime, is howling. And Lia says that that's her way of telling us that she's hungry.
Someone help her.
Dewey's going to go feed her. And she says to him, just be careful when you put her bowl down. Don't kick her tumors. The visual of this is just is terrifying.
Can we get this dog to a vet?
Yeah, I'm really afraid for what the future holds for Francine the dog. But at this point, we see a box of Peter Maivia's old things, and Atta really can't bring herself to donate any of them like she's supposed to, aside from a flyer for a Mexican restaurant.
I really like this emphasis on Peter, and even though we don't see him in the present tense, we get to kind of get an idea of how he was as a father, because Atta clearly really, really loves him. And in The Rock's book, he says, even though my grandfather was the toughest man alive, he was also the sweetest guy you'd ever want to meet. He was gentle and kind, especially to my mother and me. If he was capable of knocking the piss out of you, he was also capable of charming you with a song or a smile.
And we see how charming he can be in the home movies of young Atta singing and playing ukulele, and Peter's just kind of waving and, gesturing to the camera. And he just seems very nice and like a very warm person. And, he really enjoyed his daughter singing. And this is where Lia and Atta have a moment. And Lia says that Peter is always with them, but it would be really helpful to be able to talk to him and ask his advice now. And Atta says, that's funny because I always remember him asking you for advice. He believed in you, and that's why he left you the business, which is, a very heartwarming moment. But Lia also turns that around on Atta when Atta is talking about that she stopped singing because it just didn't feel right to sing without him. And Lia says, you're not singing without him, you're singing because of him, which really inspires Atta to kind of follow her path that she was on and really start to take singing more seriously again.
It's such a nice moment between the two of them because in the past couple episodes, we haven't really seen a whole lot of Lia and definitely not a lot of Lia and Atta. So it's just nice to see that they have this connection, this mother-daughter connection, and just seeing how much The Rock's grandfather inspired them and loved them. It's just a really nice moment.
Yeah, definitely one of the more heartwarming moments that we've had on the show so far. We cut to a scene of the Johnson family going out to eat at a fancy restaurant. And there's some dialogue from 2032 Rock, talking about the big change that they underwent from eating fast food in their car to going to fancy restaurants like this. This scene is really about Rocky Johnson feeling slighted that Vince McMahon didn't personally call him to tell him that he didn't want him to work the MSG show so he could work Lia's show. And really just kind of making it known that he wants to feel valuable to an organization. He wants to feel like he's important. He wants to be Vince's top guy. And, he's not being made to feel that way.
Yeah, he might not ever, cheat Lia out of anything because that's family, but he can understand why the other guys would go to Yao.
A lot of internal conflict for Rocky Johnson at this point, and in the last scene, we see that come to a head, but right now we have the scene from the previews and the trailers where we see young Dewey attempting to order a tequila and a martini, but finally settling on a Shirley Temple with extra cherries. I used to drink Shirley Temples when I was a kid, and we would be at a place where all the adults were drinking alcoholic beverages, and I would get a Shirley Temple because that's what you got.
I don't even know what a Shirley Temple is. I've never really been to a thing. I'm young Rock where he's just eating fast food out of the car.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
I can't really describe a Shirley Temple for you, but I remember liking them, and I'd probably order one today if we were somewhere, because obviously I still don't drink, and I like Shirley Temples.
I'll just take a Coke.
At this point, we get Atta's decision that she is going to audition for Star Search, and then she doubles down on the singing by getting up and performing at the restaurant and singing I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross and dedicating it to her dad, which I thought was very nice. I wasn't able to find any information on if Stacey Leilua actually sang this herself, if that's her singing voice.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know she was posting some behind-the-scenes photos from that specific scene, but I don't think she mentioned whether or not she was actually singing.
And finally, we end the episode with a scene at the Sweat Temple Gym, which is disgusting. A disgusting name. Rocky Johnson has a signing there. Dewey is selling merchandise. And what do you know? Greg Yao shows up with his yellow cowboy boots to make Rocky an offer and also an expensive French ham.
So this makes me have so many questions. I get the feeling that Yao possibly only compensates his wrestlers with ham.
Yeah, some promoters pay you in hot dogs, he pays you in ham.
With a huge ham.
I like his little spiel that he goes on. You wrestle for me, you'll be my number one guy. You want an action figure? You got it. Hell, I'll make your whole family action figures. Professional wrestler's son.
How does Yao have this power to guarantee action figures? He's just a regional promoter.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know yet. And that's something that we will explore a little bit more in the next 1982 episode, I hope. A little bit more about Greg Yao and kind of how his wrestlers are doing, how they're faring over there in the quote-unquote greener pastures with Greg Yao. But Rocky is trying to kind of downplay this situation when Dewey asks him what that was all about. But Dewey walks away and kind of has a little bit of a knowing look. So I think maybe at this point he does understand what's going on and that there's this rival promoter to his grandma, and he just made his dad a really good offer. And he even offered him his own action figure.
For a 10-year-old, I bet that promise would be very exciting. And maybe he doesn't fully understand that this would take business away from his grandma. I mean, he's smart to the business, but he is only 10.
Although I would really like to see them come out now with a professional wrestler's son, young Rock action figure. I think that would be fun tie-in merchandise for this show. And then we wrap up with my choice of quote for this week's edition of The Rock Says, with that whole factory scene and the campaign ad. And this whole episode, like we said, is Dwayne Johnson campaign propaganda.
Yeah, we actually don't get a whole lot of Dewey at all in this episode. I'm wondering if this is how all of the 1982 specific episodes are going to go. Because, like we said, he is only 10, so the wrestlers kind of have more interesting things going on. What could a 10-year-old boy really be doing?
And there are also just so many big personalities
in
this time period, especially that, 87 is pretty much all Dwayne all the time.
And I'm sure 1990 will be too.
But I do think what we do get of Adrian Grew, I think, he does very well in the role. And he's a very precocious kid, and he has a lot of really cute moments. So I do enjoy this 82 time period. And I just enjoyed being back in Hawaii in general. I love that family barbecue scene with all those characters together. And the one thing that this episode did leave me wanting more of is more wrestling scenes, to see kind of more flashbacks, but also I really wanted to see that battle royal. I also really want to see the eventual showdown between Lia and Greg Yao, just more Greg Yao in general. Also, the interplay between Lia and Vince, that I'm sure we'll get more of that as the season goes on. So setting up some really interesting character interactions and twists and turns for the 1982 episodes, at least, as this season goes on.
Yeah, and, who knows? Maybe we'll see a Yao-Vince interaction.
I would love to see Greg Yao and Vince McMahon interact. I think that
Yao in his cowboy outfit, Vince in one of those weird powder blue 80s suits.
Also excited to see what comes of Ata's kind of singing storyline, what happens with Star Search, and kind of where we find her with that. I know the next episode will probably be 1990, one can assume, since we've spent time in 87 and 82 in the past two episodes. So I feel that can get a little bit messy, especially if we're in episode 7 and 8, and each time period kind of has their own narrative that we flash back to. So it'll be interesting to see how they
weave it all together
into a cohesive season, because like I said earlier in the episode, just when I think I figured out kind of the formula that each episode will have, it kind of throws me for a loop and does something a little bit different, which is good because, there is something to be said for consistency, but also just keeping things interesting and changing it up and not getting into too much of a kind of formulaic sitcom, I think is ultimately a positive for a show like this.
I will say I'm very excited to see what they do in the next episode, which, like we said, will probably be 1990, because in the first episode, that was the shortest amount of time spent. So I really want to see where they go with that.
Also, I just wanted to note not as many needle drops in this episode as there had been in the past two. Obviously, we saw Atta performing I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross, but the other big one in the beginning was Give It To Me Baby by Rick James, which sets up the restaurant scene in Hawaii. So still very good selections for the songs that they include in this show, but not as many. I think the budget for the first two, they probably blew a lot of that on the dozen songs between the two episodes there.
Interesting that both of the needle drops, though, are happening in relation to restaurant scenes.
Yeah, that's true. Also, just wanted to mention on the subject of music before we get out of here, I do a project called Wrestling Undercover, and it's on YouTube and on SoundCloud. You can go to youtube.com/Wrestling Undercover. I have a brand new cover up that I just posted this week as we are recording this. It is an instrumental cover, a synthwave cover of Bianca Belair's theme, Watch Me Shine. So if you want to check that out, again, youtube.com/Wrestling Undercover or at soundcloud.com/CMStrike. I also have links so you can download the MP3s. I've done a bunch of covers over the past couple of years on there, so that's something that I do about once a month or so. And if you want to check that out, I would be very happy if you did.
There's even a cover of one of the Rock's themes.
Yes.
Tie in.
Yes, the theme song for our Rock Says segment is my 90s dance remix of the Rock's theme. So you can find that and more at youtube.com/Wrestling Undercover. But that's going to do it for this episode of Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Thank you so much again for listening. Join us next time for Season 1, Episode 4 of Young Rock.
Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at PWRepackaged and email us at pwrepackaged@gmail.com.
Subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. And visit pwrepackaged.crd.co for links to everything.
If you'd like to support the show, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or any other platform that features reviews.
Pro Wrestling Repackaged is a Multitrack Minds production. Visit multitrackminds.com for projects and audio production services by yours truly.